Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There exists, within the grim darkness of the far future, a peculiar kind of silence. Not the silence of an empty room or the quiet between heartbeats, but rather the silence of things deliberately left unsaid. The Imperium of man, that vast and crumbling edifice spanning 1,000,000 worlds, maintains archives so extensive that entire planets serve as libraries. And yet, for all this obsessive documentation, for all the scribes who labor in darkness, recording every detail of humanity's long decline, there are gaps, deliberate omissions, stories that end mid-sentence, as if the very act of completion would invoke something terrible. These silences are not accidental. They are engineered, carved into the bedrock of imperial history with the same care that a sculptor might apply to marble. The Inquisition burns books. The Ecclesiarchy redacts records. The Adeptus Mechanicus guards knowledge behind layers of ritual and cant, so dense that truth becomes indistinguishable from prayer. And in the spaces between what is known and what is forbidden, theories grow like fungus in the dark. To understand Warhammer 40,000 is to understand that uncertainty is not a flaw in the narrative, but its foundation. Games Workshop, the architects of this universe, have made an art form of the unanswered question. They give us fragments, contradictions, accounts that cannot all be true simultaneously, and then they leave us to piece together our own understanding from the wreckage. This is not laziness. This is genius, because in a universe where every truth is contested, where history is written by fanatics and madmen, where reality itself bends to the whims of gods that feed on emotion, ambiguity becomes the most honest possible approach to storytelling. Consider what we think we know. The Emperor of mankind sits entombed upon the golden throne, neither dead nor truly alive, sustained by the sacrifice of 1,000 souls each day. Or does he? Perhaps what sits upon that throne is merely a corpse, and the light that guides humanity through the warp is something else entirely. Perhaps it always was. The Primarchs were scattered across the galaxy by the machinations of chaos. Or were they? Perhaps the Emperor scattered them himself, seeding the galaxy with his sons like a gardener plants seeds, knowing that only through hardship would they grow strong enough for the trials ahead. 20 Primarchs were created. 18 are accounted for, their fates known, or at least speculated upon with some confidence. But 2 are missing, not lost, not forgotten, actively erased. Their legions struck from every record, their names forbidden even among those who remember when they existed. Why? What crime could be so terrible that even the Emperor, who forgave much, could not forgive this? What failure so complete that its very memory had to be excised like a cancer? The answers to these questions do not exist in any official text. Games Workshop has made it clear that some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries. But that has not stopped the community from theorizing, from taking the scattered fragments of lore and arranging them into patterns that might, if you squint in the right light, resemble truth. These theories are the folklore of a grimdark age, passed from fan to fan. Debated in forums and comment sections, refined over decades until they take on a life of their own. Some of these theories are supported by subtle hints in the lore, breadcrumbs deliberately left by authors who understand the pleasure of a good mystery. Others are pure speculation, fan imagination filling in blanks that may never have been meant to be filled. And a few, the most interesting ones, occupy a space between canon and fanon, so ambiguous that even Games Workshop seems uncertain which category they belong to. What follows is an exploration of the biggest, most persistent, and most fascinating theories that have emerged from the Warhammer 40,000 community. We will examine the evidence for each, such as it is. We will consider the counter-arguments. We will trace the origins of these ideas and watch how they have evolved over the years. And we will try, as best we can, to understand why these particular mysteries have captured the imagination of so many for so long. This is not a search for definitive answers. In the grim darkness of the far future, there are no definitive answers, only competing narratives and conflicting accounts. Instead, this is an appreciation of uncertainty itself, of the way that questions can sometimes be more satisfying than answers. Because in the end, what makes Warhammer 40,000 compelling is not what we know for certain, but what we can only guess at. The shadows at the edge of the light. The whispers of things that might have been or might yet be. The terrible suspicion that the official history, for all its apparent certainty, might be nothing more than another layer of deception in a universe built on lies. So let us descend into those shadows together. Let us examine the theories that refuse to die, the speculation that has hardened into something approaching belief, the questions that echo through decades of lore without ever finding satisfactory resolution. And let us remember, as we do, that in the 41st millennium, truth is a rare and precious thing, and certainty is the luxury of the ignorant. The Emperor as the fifth Chaos God. In the depths beneath the Imperial Palace, where ancient technology hums with purposes long forgotten, something is changing. The Emperor of mankind has sat upon the golden throne for more than 10,000 years, his mortal body ravaged beyond recognition, sustained only by archaeotech older than memory and the sacrifice of countless souls. But what if the thing that sits upon that throne is no longer truly the Emperor? What if 10 millennia of worship by trillions upon trillions of humans has transformed him into something else entirely? What if, in trying to save humanity from the darkness, we have inadvertently created another god of chaos? This is perhaps the most unsettling theory in all of Warhammer 40,000 lore. It suggests that the Emperor, that bastion of order and reason who spent his life fighting against superstition and the influence of the warp, has himself become the very thing he despised. And the evidence, scattered though it may be across decades of lore, is disturbingly compelling. Let us begin with what we know about the birth of gods in the warp. The Chaos Gods did not simply spring into existence fully formed. They were born from the emotions and beliefs of mortal races, coalescing over millennia as psychic energy accumulated in the Imperium. Khorne was born from endless warfare and the hunger for blood, Nurgle from despair and the fear of death, Tzeentch from the desire for knowledge and change, and Slaanesh, youngest of the four, from the decadent excess of the Eldari Empire. Each represents not just negative emotions, but entire spectrums of mortal experience, concentrated and magnified until they achieved consciousness and terrible will. Consider then what humanity has been doing for 10,000 years. Across a million worlds, in cathedrals that dwarf mountains, billions of humans pray daily to the God Emperor. They offer up their devotion, their faith, their desperate hope that he will protect them from the darkness. They die in his name, billions upon billions. Their last thoughts are prayer to the master of mankind. The ecclesiarchy has spent 10 millennia building a religion around the Emperor, transforming him from a figure who explicitly rejected divinity into the central deity of the largest faith the galaxy has ever known. All that worship, all that faith, all that psychic energy directed toward a single focal point. Where does it go? The warp is shaped by emotion and belief. It responds to the psychic emanations of mortal minds like clay responds to the potter's hands. For 10,000 years, humanity has been sculpting something in the warp, whether they intended to or not. They have been feeding it with their prayers, strengthening it with their faith, giving it form and purpose and terrible power. They have been creating a god. But here is where the theory becomes truly dark. Because unlike the other Chaos Gods, who emerged gradually from the collective unconscious of entire species, this nascent deity has a core, a seed around which all that worship has crystallized. The Emperor himself, or what remains of him. His psychic presence, already overwhelming even before his entombment, amplified by 10 millennia of worship into something that might rival the chaos gods themselves. Recent lore has given us hints that this transformation may already be underway. During the Plague Wars, when Robut Guilliman was struck down by Mortarian's godblight, the Emperor intervened directly. He channeled his power through Guilliman, destroying a portion of Nurgle's domain and wounding the Plague god himself. This was not the action of a nearly dead man clinging to existence. This was the action of something with godlike power, striking at chaos on its home ground. And then there is the matter of the Dark King. In the final moments of the Horus heresy, as documented in The End and the Death, the Emperor stood on the brink of transformation. In his rage and desperation to defeat Horus, he was ascending into a full chaos god, drawing on the power of the warp to fuel his transformation. Malcador the Sigillite sensed what his friend was becoming and was horrified. It took the intervention of Alanius Persson, one of the few remaining perpetuals, to talk the Emperor back from that abyss. Persson reminded him of his humanity, convinced him to release the power he had accumulated, even if it meant gambling everything on a battle he might not win. The Dark King was not born that day. The Emperor chose humanity over godhood, but the Chaos Gods maintain that this entity will emerge eventually, that its servants and dominion already exist somewhere in the twisting chronology of the warp. Because in the warp, time is not linear. When a god is born, it has always existed and always will exist. And if a god is prevented from being born, it also has always not existed. The paradoxes are enough to drive mortal minds to madness. So we have a being who nearly became a chaos god at the moment of his death, who has spent 10,000 years being worshipped as a god by trillions, and who has demonstrated the ability to strike at the chaos gods in their own realm. What exactly is sitting on the golden throne? Some theorists have gone further, suggesting that the Emperor is not becoming a new chaos god, but is instead the long-lost fifth god, Malal. In the earliest days of Warhammer lore, there was indeed a fifth chaos god named Malal, the renegade god, the anarch of chaos. Malal was unique among the ruinous powers because he hated the other chaos gods and dedicated himself to their destruction. He represented chaos turned against itself, the self-destructive impulse taken to its ultimate conclusion. Due to copyright disputes, Malal was eventually removed from the canon, replaced by the vaguely similar but legally distinct Malice. But what if Malal was not simply removed from continuity? What if he was retconned in-universe, erased by the other chaos gods, or prevented from fully manifesting? The Emperor, after all, has spent his entire existence fighting against chaos. His whole purpose was to unite humanity and shield it from the predations of the warp. If the Emperor were to become a chaos god, he would naturally be one dedicated to destroying the others. The god of order in the realm of chaos. The god of control and unity, where only anarchy should reign. Malal reborn, or perhaps Malal was always the Emperor's dark reflection, waiting in potential futures that may or may not come to pass. The symmetry is almost too perfect. The Emperor preached reason and rejected superstition, yet his followers built the largest religion in galactic history around him. He fought against the gods of chaos, yet may be transforming into one himself. He represented order and control, yet Malal represented anarchy and chaos turned against itself. Opposites that circle back to meet each other, thesis and antithesis, collapsing into a paradox that the linear mortal mind struggles to comprehend. There are counter-arguments, of course. The most obvious is that the Emperor is not technically dead, and chaos gods are born from the accumulation of psychic energy after death or transcendence. The Emperor's soul is still at least partially anchored to his body on the Golden Throne, but after 10,000 years in what is essentially a state between life and death, after having his consciousness distributed across the Astronomicon and the countless tasks he performs simultaneously, Can we really say that the Emperor exists as a unified being anymore? Perhaps what remains on the throne is only a fragment, while the greater portion of his essence has already ascended into the warp, fed by endless worship. Another argument is that the Chaos Gods would never allow such a thing. They worked together, for perhaps the only time in their existence, to engineer the Horus heresy specifically to kill the Emperor. Why would they permit him to ascend as a god himself? But perhaps they could not prevent it. Perhaps the Emperor's transformation is the one outcome they cannot forestall, a future that emerges from the very nature of humanity's worship. Or perhaps they do not oppose it because they believe they can corrupt it, twist this nascent god into something that serves their purposes rather than opposes them. What makes this theory so compelling is not just the evidence for it, but what it says about the nature of faith in the Imperium. The Lectitio Divinitatis, the holy book of the imperial cult, was written by Lorgar, the Primarch who would become the first to fall to chaos. The religion that shapes the beliefs of trillions was founded by a heretic. The worship that sustains the Emperor and may be transforming him into a god was built on the teachings of one of his greatest enemies. There is a horrible irony in that, perhaps even a deliberate trap, set by chaos and sprung 10,000 years later. And if the theory is true, if the Emperor is becoming, or has already become, a chaos god, what does that mean for humanity? Would such a god protect his worshippers or consume them? Would he retain any of the Emperor's original purpose, or would he become something alien and terrible, shaped more by the desperate prayers of the suffering than by his own will? The Imperial Creed teaches that the Emperor protects. But what if the thing that emerges from 10 millennia of worship is incapable of protection, capable only of the cold calculation of divine power used to perpetuate itself? In the Ecclesiarchy's most sacred texts, there is a passage that speaks of the Emperor's eventual rising, of the day when he will cast off the golden throne and lead humanity to final victory. But what if that rising is not a return, but a transformation? What if the Emperor who stands up from that throne is not the man who sat down upon it 10,000 years ago, but something else entirely? Something that wears his name and his visage, but has been fundamentally changed by millennia of worship and suffering and rage. The theory suggests that humanity's greatest hope may also be its greatest danger, that in trying to save the Emperor, they may have condemned him to become the very thing he spent his life fighting against. That the Imperium, in its desperation to hold back the darkness, has been nurturing another darkness within its very heart. And that when the time comes, when the crisis reaches its peak, and humanity calls out one final time for salvation, what answers may be something they do not recognize. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is an old saying, "Be careful what you wish for." Humanity wished for a god to protect them. They may be about to discover the true cost of that wish. The lost Primarchs, forgotten and purged. In the Imperial Palace on Terra, there is a hall where statues of the Primarchs once stood. 20 plinths, arranged in a great circle, each bearing the image of one of the Emperor's sons. The craftsmanship is exquisite, beyond anything mortal hands could achieve. Each statue captures not just the physical form of its subject, but something of their essence, their character frozen in stone for all eternity. Or at least, 18 of them do. 2 plinths stand empty, their statues removed so thoroughly that even the manner of their removal has been forgotten. 2 spaces in that circle where Primarchs should stand but do not. The 2nd and the 11th. The forgotten and the purged. This is perhaps the oldest and most enduring mystery in all of Warhammer 40,000. What happened to the 2 lost Primarchs? Why were they and their legions erased from Imperial history so completely that even their names are forbidden? And why, when half the Primarchs turned traitor and nearly destroyed the Imperium, were these 2 considered such greater threats that their very existence had to be expunged from memory? The mystery is deliberate. Rick Priestley, one of the original creators of Warhammer 40,000, has stated that the Lost Legions were created specifically to give players space to create their own chapters and backstories. They are blank spaces in the lore by design, meant never to be filled. But that has not stopped decades of speculation, and the hints scattered through official sources have only deepened the mystery rather than solving it. What do we know for certain? Very little, and even that little is hedged about with uncertainty. We know that there were 20 Primarchs, and that 2 of them, the 2nd and 11th, are no longer acknowledged to exist. We know that their legions were likewise erased, though scattered references suggest their Space Marines may have been absorbed into other legions, primarily the Ultramarines. We know that the erasure happened early in the Great Crusade, before the Horus Heresy, because even when the Primarchs were discussing matters of utmost secrecy, they would not speak of their lost brothers. Malcador, the Sigillite himself, bound them with oaths never to discuss what happened. In Deliverance Lost, Corax meets the Emperor early in the Crusade. The Emperor tells him that he is joining 17 other Primarchs, not 19. When Corax asks how this can be possible, given that he knows he is the 19th, the Emperor's face becomes bleak, filled with deep sorrow, and he says only that it is a conversation for another day. That conversation never happens in the canon. Whatever truth the Emperor might have shared, he took to the Golden Throne with him. The other Primarchs remember their lost brothers, or at least remember that they existed. When they gather at the siege of Phaeton, seats are left empty for the absent Primarchs. Guilliman says their absence must be marked, that places must be left for them, that this is simply honor. But what kind of honor requires remembering someone whose name you are forbidden to speak? What kind of respect demands an empty chair for those who are supposed to never have existed? The emotion that surrounds the lost Primarchs is telling. The other Primarchs do not speak of them with the bitter hatred they reserve for those who turned traitor. They speak of them, when they speak at all, with grief and sadness. Even Guilliman, the most practical and least sentimental of the Emperor's sons, describes them as having failed rather than fallen. This suggests that whatever happened to the 2nd and 11th was not simple rebellion. If they had turned against the Imperium, their memory would likely be reviled, their names spoken as curses rather than avoided altogether. Instead, there is something more complex at work, a tragedy rather than a betrayal, or perhaps a betrayal of such a fundamental nature that it could not be addressed through conventional means. So what are the theories? They are legion, pun intended, and they range from the prosaic to the profoundly disturbing. The simplest theory is that one or both of the lost Primarchs died, victims of their own worlds or circumstances beyond their control. Perhaps the Emperor arrived too late to save them, finding only corpses where his sons should have been. Perhaps they were killed by the very people they were raised among, their potential never realized. This would explain the Emperor's sorrow and the Primarch's grief. It would also explain why their memory was erased, not out of shame for what they did, but out of sorrow for what they never got the chance to do. The Emperor did not want the Imperium reminded of his failure to protect his sons. But this theory, while emotionally satisfying, does not quite fit the evidence. Dead Primarchs would be martyrs. Their memory would be honored, their legions perhaps renamed in tribute to their fallen fathers. The level of erasure we see suggests not just death, but something more troubling, something that could not be publicly acknowledged. A more sinister theory suggests that the lost Primarchs were victims of mutation or genetic instability. The process of creating the Primarchs involved technologies and genecraft that pushed far beyond human understanding, possibly incorporating materials stolen from the Chaos Gods themselves. Perhaps the process was not perfect. Perhaps 2 of the Primarchs emerged from their gestation flawed in some fundamental way, their bodies or minds twisted by imperfections in their creation. The Emperor, horrified by what he had made, destroyed them and their legions, rather than let them become symbols of his failure. Their Space Marines, who bore diluted versions of their Primarch's gene seed, were mind-wiped and inducted into other legions, to spare them the shame of their father's flaws. This theory has some support in scattered references to genetic issues within the legions. Several of the 18 acknowledged Primarchs and their sons suffer from various flaws: the red thirst and black rage of the Blood Angels, the curse of the Wolfen in the Space Wolves, the instability that plagues the Sons of the Lion. If these relatively manageable mutations are what survived, what horrors were deemed too terrible to allow to persist? Then there is the theory that suggests corruption by chaos, but of a different sort than the Horus heresy. Perhaps one or both of the lost Primarchs encountered the ruinous powers early, before the other Primarchs understood what they were facing. Perhaps they were seduced or corrupted, turned into creatures so twisted that even keeping them imprisoned was deemed too dangerous. The Emperor, unwilling to admit that his own creations could fall to chaos even before the heresy, erased all evidence of their existence. This would explain why the knowledge was so carefully guarded. If it became known that Primarchs could be corrupted by chaos, the other Primarchs might begin to doubt themselves, to wonder if they too could fall. Better to pretend the lost Primarchs never existed than to acknowledge such a terrifying possibility. Some theorists have suggested that the lost Primarchs discovered something they were not meant to know. Perhaps they learned the truth about the Emperor's deal with the Chaos Gods on Moloch. Perhaps they discovered the Emperor's plans for humanity and rejected them. Perhaps they simply asked too many questions and received answers that drove them to rebellion or madness. The Emperor, unable to tolerate dissent at such a fundamental level, eliminated them and rewrote history to ensure others would not follow their path. One of the darker theories suggests that the lost Primarchs turned against humanity itself. Perhaps one of them, raised on a world dominated by Xenos, came to identify more with aliens than with his own species. Perhaps he refused to participate in the xenocidal Great Crusade, arguing that the galaxy had room for multiple species. Such heresy, in the Emperor's eyes, might have warranted not just execution, but the erasure of all memory. To acknowledge that one of his own sons had rejected humanity's manifest destiny would undermine the entire ideological foundation of the Crusade. An even more disturbing possibility is that one or both of the lost Primarchs succeeded where others failed. Perhaps they achieved something the Emperor could not tolerate: true independence, true freedom from his control. Perhaps they saw through his manipulations and decided to chart their own course. The Emperor, unable to bring them to heel and unwilling to acknowledge that his control was not absolute, destroyed them as a warning to the others. Obey or be forgotten. There is also the theory involving the Rangdan genocides. We know that these wars, fought during the Great Crusade, were some of the most brutal campaigns the Imperium ever undertook. Entire expeditionary fleets were lost. The casualties were so severe that the losses were never fully replaced. And it is hinted, in carefully vague language, that at least one of the lost legions was destroyed during these campaigns. But destroyed how? By the enemy? Or by the Imperium itself, when something went horribly wrong? Perhaps the Rangdan had weapons that could corrupt Space Marines, turning them against their own. Perhaps one of the lost Primarchs and his legion were compromised, transformed into something Xenos and terrible. The Emperor, unable to save them and unwilling to let them remain as a testament to the Rangdan's power, ordered their complete destruction. The Space Wolves, the Emperor's executioners, would have carried out this terrible duty. And afterward, all record of what happened would have been sealed, because the Imperium could not admit that there were threats that could destroy entire legions so thoroughly. What makes the mystery of the lost Primarchs so compelling is that all these theories could be partially true. One Primarch might have been lost to mutation, while the other was lost to chaos. One might have died nobly, while the other betrayed everything the Imperium stood for. The erasure of their records makes it impossible to know, and that uncertainty is precisely the point. By refusing to provide a definitive answer, the law invites us to imagine the worst possible scenarios, and in our imaginations, they become more terrible than any specific truth could be. There is a melancholy to the lost Primarchs that the traitor Primarchs lack. Horus and his brothers chose their fates, for good or ill. They made decisions and faced the consequences. But the 2nd and 11th never got that chance, or if they did, their choices were deemed so unacceptable that their very existence had to be erased. They are cautionary tales whose details have been lost, warnings that no one remembers the content of. They are the Emperor's deepest shame, locked away so thoroughly that even those who remember them are forbidden to speak. In the Great Hall of Statues, 2 plinths remain empty. The spaces where they stood gather dust that no servitor is programmed to clean. And in the silence of that hall, in the weight of those absences, we can feel the presence of questions that will never be answered. What were their names? What were their personalities, their strengths, their flaws? Did they die heroes or monsters? Were they victims or villains? We will never know. And perhaps that is exactly how the Emperor wanted it. Some truths are too dangerous to be remembered, some failures too profound to be acknowledged. Better to let them fade into silence, leaving only empty spaces and the terrible weight of what might have been. Tyrannid origins, extragalactic horror, or ancient weapon. From beyond the galactic rim, they come, an endless hunger moving through the void between galaxies, drawn by the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon like moths to a flame. The Tyrannids, the great devourer, a Xenos threat unlike any other the Imperium has faced, because they do not seek conquest or glory or power. They seek only to consume, to strip worlds bare of all biological matter and move on to the next feeding ground. They are the nightmare at the edge of darkness, and what makes them truly terrifying is that we know almost nothing about them. The Tyrannids do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They cannot be reasoned with or deterred. They exist only to feed their vast hive fleets, to add new genetic material to their endless catalogue of bioforms.
You know, after years of diving into Warhammer lore, what strikes me most about these theories is how they reflect our own need to find pattern in chaos. We're doing exactly what the characters in this universe do, trying to make sense of a reality that deliberately resists explanation. And honestly, I think that's what keeps me coming back. There's something deeply human about looking at the lost Primarch's empty plinths or the Ethereal's mysterious origins and saying, there has to be more to this story. Maybe Games Workshop knows we need these mysteries more than we need answers. Maybe the real treasure isn't solving the puzzles, but the conversations we have while trying. I don't know about you, but I've spent countless nights debating whether Alfarius is truly dead with friends. And those discussions meant more than any official answer I ever could. That's the magic of this setting. But yeah, let's continue.
To reduce entire star systems to lifeless rocks orbiting cold suns. And for all the Imperium's efforts to study them, to understand them, the most basic questions remain unanswered. Where did they come from? Why did they come here? And most disturbingly, what are they fleeing from? That last question is never asked in official sources, but it looms large in community speculation. The Tyrannids entered our galaxy from the intergalactic void, having traveled through the space between galaxies for an unknown length of time. But galaxies are not evenly distributed through the universe. To reach ours, the Tyrannids would have had to pass through or near other galaxies. Why did they not stop there? What could drive an all-consuming swarm to pass by potential feeding grounds in favor of a single target? Unless they were not drawn here but driven. Unless they are not predators but refugees, fleeing from something even more terrible than themselves. This is pure speculation, but it resonates because it fits the grimdark nature of Warhammer 40,000. The idea that the Tyrannids, this seemingly unstoppable force that has already consumed countless worlds, might themselves be running from an even greater threat, is a special kind of horror. It suggests that we have not yet seen the worst that the universe has to offer, that the Tyrannids are merely the herald of something to come. But let us set aside that nightmare scenario, and focus on theories that have more foundation in the lore. The question of Tyranid origins has sparked some of the most creative speculation in the community, and one theory in particular has achieved a kind of legendary status. The theory that the Tyranids were created by the Old Ones. The Old Ones were the galaxy's first great civilization, ancient beyond comprehension even by the standards of races that measure their history in millions of years. They were masters of psychic communion and genetic manipulation, capable of engineering entire species to suit their purposes. They created the Eldari as psychic warriors to fight their battles. They created the Krork, the ancestors of modern orcs, as nearly indestructible shock troops. And they reshaped countless other species across the galaxy, each designed with a specific purpose in mind. When the war in heaven reached its peak, when the Satan and their Necron servants threatened to exterminate all life in the galaxy, the Old Ones were losing. Their created races were powerful, but not powerful enough. The Satan were essentially gods, and the Necrons were their tireless, deathless servants. The Old Ones needed a final solution, a weapon that could reset the galactic playing field. Perhaps that weapon was the Tyranids. Consider what we know about the Tyranids. They possess a hive mind, a psychic network that connects every organism in the swarm into a single vast consciousness. This is eerily similar to the greenskin gestalt field, suggesting that whoever created the Tyranids might have used similar techniques that the Old Ones employed with the Krork. The Tyranids are genetic chameleons, able to adapt and evolve with terrifying speed, incorporating useful traits from consumed species into their own bioforms. This level of genetic manipulation exceeds anything any current race can achieve, but it is exactly the kind of thing the Old Ones were known for. Most tellingly, the Tyranids seem designed to consume all biological matter and move on. They do not colonize, they do not build, they do not create infrastructure or establish lasting presence. They simply eat everything and leave, reducing planets to barren rocks. What purpose would such a creature serve? Perhaps the purpose of ending a war that had consumed the galaxy. Perhaps the Old Ones, seeing that the war in heaven had become a threat to all life, created the Tyranids as a reset button, a way to wipe the board clean and start over. The theory suggests that the Old Ones released the Tyranids into the greater universe with instructions to consume all biological matter in the galaxy and then move on. Once everything was gone, once the Satan had no life energy to feed on and the Necrons had no reason to continue their war, the galaxy would be empty, but not dead. And the Old Ones, hidden somewhere beyond the galactic rim, could return and begin anew. They could reseed the galaxy with life, creating new races that might avoid the mistakes of the old. But the plan went wrong. The Necrons destroyed the Old Ones before they could complete their project. Or the Old Ones lost control of their creation. Or the Tyranids evolved beyond their original programming. However it happened, the Old Ones never returned to call off their ultimate weapon. The Tyranids remained in the void between galaxies, dormant perhaps, until the Astronomicon lit up the sky like a beacon. And then they began their long journey home to the galaxy they were designed to consume. The beauty of this theory is that it explains several otherwise puzzling aspects of the Tyranids. It explains their incredible biological sophistication, their seemingly purpose-built nature. It explains why they have no culture, no history, no individuality beyond what the hive mind requires. They are tools, weapons, and tools do not need such things. It explains their apparent age. The earliest hive fleets to arrive seem less refined than later ones, suggesting millions of years of evolution. And it explains the terrible efficiency with which they reduce worlds to nothing, because they were designed to do exactly that. There are variations on this theory. Some suggest that the Old Ones did not create the Tyranids from scratch but found them, perhaps in another galaxy, and modified them for use as weapons. Others propose that the Tyranids were the Old Ones' final desperate gambit, created in the last moments before their civilization fell, which is why they are incomplete or not functioning as intended. Still others argue that the Tyranids might be a failed experiment, discarded by the old ones and left to evolve in the dark spaces between galaxies until they became what they are today. But there are problems with the old ones' theory. The most significant is that it might be too neat, too convenient an explanation. It ties up the mystery in a way that eliminates some of what makes the Tyranids frightening. If they are just another engineered species, another tool created by an ancient civilization, then they become comprehensible. They fit into a pattern we understand. And part of what makes the Tyranids effective as antagonists is precisely that they do not fit any pattern. They are alien in the truest sense, operating according to logic that might not be logic at all. An alternate theory suggests that the Tyranids are not engineered, but evolved. That in some other galaxy or cluster of galaxies, they emerged naturally as apex predators and simply kept evolving until they achieved their current form. This theory emphasizes that the Tyranids do not need a creator. They could have developed naturally over deep time, gradually perfecting their biology through countless cycles of consumption and evolution. They could be what happens when natural selection runs to its ultimate conclusion. The perfect organism, designed by evolution itself to eat everything. This interpretation is in some ways more terrifying than the old one's theory, because it suggests that the universe itself, given enough time, will inevitably produce something like the Tyranids, that there is no malevolent creator behind them, no ancient plot or purpose. They simply are, the way sharks or bacteria simply are. They exist because their ancestors were good at surviving and reproducing, and after millions or billions of years of iteration, they became the great devourer. A third theory suggests that the Tyranids might be related to the warp in some fundamental way. While they cast a shadow in the warp that blocks psychic powers, they are clearly psychic themselves. The hive mind operates through psychic connection. Perhaps the Tyranids are the physical universe's answer to the chaos gods. Where the chaos gods are immaterial entities that can only interact with reality through demons and corruption, the Tyranids are material entities that use psychic power to coordinate their swarm. Perhaps they are two sides of the same coin, matter and energy, finding different solutions to the same problem. Some have even suggested that the Tyranids might be older than the galaxy itself, that they existed before the old ones, before the Necrontyre, perhaps before life as we understand it emerged in our galaxy at all, that they have been moving through the universe since its earliest epochs, consuming galaxy after galaxy, and our galaxy is simply the next in an endless line of feeding grounds. This theory positions them not as weapons or predators, but as forces of nature, more akin to entropy itself than to any form of life. They are the heat death of the universe given form and purpose. A darker speculation suggests that the Tyranids are not running from anything, but they are pursuing something. Perhaps they are drawn not just to the Astronomicon, but to something deeper, something about this galaxy in particular that they want or need. Perhaps it is the presence of the warp, which seems to be more active in our galaxy than it has any right to be. Perhaps it is the lingering influence of the old ones or the Cetan. Perhaps it is humanity itself, which has demonstrated an unusual ability to affect the warp through collective belief. What if the Tyranids are not mindless predators, but instead are seeking something specific and will not stop until they have consumed enough biological matter to find it or create it? What makes the Tyranids fascinating from a lore perspective is that Games Workshop has been very careful never to give us a definitive answer about their origins. We know how they fight, how they adapt, how they organize their fleets, but we do not know where they came from, why they exist, or what, if anything, drives them beyond hunger. This ambiguity allows them to remain truly alien, truly other, in a way that most Xenos races in Warhammer 40,000 are not. The Imperium has fought Xenos for 10,000 years. They understand orcs. Brutal but predictable. They understand Aeldari. ancient and cunning but operating according to comprehensible logic. They even understand chaos on some level. The warp follows certain rules. The demons respond to certain stimuli. But the Tyranids do not fit into any framework the Imperium understands. They do not negotiate. They do not retreat. They do not recognize defeat. They simply keep coming, adapting to overcome whatever resistance they meet. And the only response that seems to work is to burn everything and hope that denies them enough biomass to move on. And this is what makes the uncertainty about their origins so thematically appropriate in a universe where everything is documented and recorded and categorized, where the Mechanicus catalogues every piece of technology and the Inquisition investigates every heresy. There is something that cannot be explained or understood, something that resists all attempts to fit it into the familiar narratives. The Tyranids are the unknown, the truly alien, the reminder that for all humanity's hubris, there are things in the universe that do not care about human understanding and cannot be forced to fit human categories. When the first Tyranid hive fleet entered the galaxy, when the first worlds were consumed, the Imperium tried to understand what they were facing. They studied specimens, dissected captured bioforms, analyzed their tactics and strategies, and they learned how to fight them after a fashion. But they never learned why. Why this galaxy? Why now? Why at all? These questions remain unanswered, and perhaps they cannot be answered. Perhaps there is no why. Perhaps the Tyranids simply are, and seeking deeper meaning in their existence is a very human failing that has no application to something so fundamentally not human. In the grim darkness of the far future, the Tyranids are the literal embodiment of an existential threat, not because they want to destroy humanity or corrupt it or enslave it, but because they want nothing at all. They do not see humanity as enemies or rivals or even prey in the conventional sense. They see biomass to be converted into more Tyranids. And when they have consumed everything, they will move on to the next galaxy, leaving behind only silence and empty worlds under cold stars. This is the horror of the Great Devourer. Not that it hates us, but that it does not care whether we exist at all. The Ethereals and Tau. Manipulation, the shadow of unknown masters. In the histories of the Tau Empire, there is an event called the Monto, the Age of Terror. It was a time when the Tau castes were at war with one another, fire warriors fighting earth workers, air pilots bombing water merchants. The entire species stood on the brink of self-annihilation, centuries of progress burning away in internecine conflict that seemed to have no end. And then, from out of mysterious storms and strange lights in the sky, the Ethereals came. Within a generation, they had united all Tau under the philosophy of the greater good, ended the wars, and set the species on the path to becoming an interstellar empire. The Tau call this the time of unity, their salvation from destruction. But salvation is a curious word when spoken by people who cannot explain where their saviors came from or why every Tau feels compelled to obey them. The Ethereals appeared mysteriously. They wield what seems to be a form of mind control over other Tau. They guide the species with a subtle but absolute authority that brooks no dissent. And when Commander Farsight, one of the greatest military minds the Tau have ever produced, discovered something while examining an artifact he recovered from an alien world, he immediately severed all contact with the Ethereals and established his own enclave on the far side of Tau space. He has never explained what he learned, and the Ethereals have never stopped trying to bring him back into the fold or destroy him. Something is deeply wrong with the Tau Empire. The other races of the galaxy know it. The Imperium, suspicious of anything that contradicts their doctrine of human supremacy, sees the Tau as an aberration that must be eliminated. But even they cannot quite explain what troubles them about the Tau beyond the usual xenophobia. There is something artificial about the way Tau society functions, something too perfect, too orchestrated. And at the center of that orchestration sit the ethereals, mysterious, powerful, and utterly unaccountable. The question that burns at the heart of Tau lore is simple. Who created the ethereals? Because everything about them screams engineered rather than evolved. The organ in their heads that some imperial dissectionists believe facilitates pheromonal control. Their sudden appearance at exactly the right moment to prevent Tau extinction. The way they exert seemingly unbreakable authority over other Tau, despite having no logical basis for such control in Tau biology or culture before they arrived. None of this happened naturally. Someone made the ethereals. Someone designed them with specific purpose. The question is who, and more importantly, why? The most popular theory attributes their creation to the Eldari. The ancient space elves have a long history of genetic manipulation, inherited from their creators, the Old Ones. They engineered entire species for various purposes and continue to use biological modification in their own society. They also have motivation to create the Tau. The Eldari stand on the brink of extinction, hunted by Slaanesh, and unable to reproduce at rates sufficient to sustain their population. They need allies, but most species in the galaxy are either too hostile or too corrupted by chaos to be useful. Enter the Tau, young, dynamic, idealistic, and most importantly, having almost no presence in the warp. If you were an Eldari Farseer looking to create an ally race that could resist chaos corruption, the Tau would be nearly perfect. The evidence for Eldari involvement is circumstantial but intriguing. The Tau homeworld was cut off from the rest of the galaxy by massive warp storms during a critical period in their development. These storms lasted exactly long enough for the Tau to evolve from primitive peoples into Bronze Age civilization and then dissipated just in time for the ethereals to appear. Warp storms of that magnitude and duration do not occur naturally in isolated systems. They require either extraordinary cosmic coincidence or deliberate manipulation. Moreover, the Eldari have repeatedly aided the Tau at critical moments. They have appeared to warn Tau forces of impending danger, to guide them away from threats, or even to fight alongside them against common enemies. This is extremely unusual behavior for the Eldari, who are typically concerned only with their own survival and the machinations of their craft worlds. That they take such interest in a young species suggests that the Tau serve some purpose in the Eldari's long-term plans. A variation on this theory suggests that the ethereals might not be engineered by the Eldari, but discovered by them. There is a species called the coral, insectoid xenos, who share certain physiological similarities with the ethereals. According to scattered lore, the Eldari once helped the coral overcome a plague, and in return demanded access to their queen. The Eldari were explicitly seeking to create an incorruptible race, a species resistant to chaos. Perhaps they used genetic material from the coral to engineer the ethereals, creating a caste that could guide the Tau toward the greater good while remaining resistant to warp corruption. But there are other candidates for the role of ethereal creators. The most disturbing is the Catan, the ancient star gods who turned the Necron tier into the Necrons. The physical resemblance between Necron tier, as depicted in ancient records, and Tau is noteworthy. Similar stature, similar facial structure, and most importantly, similar lack of warp presence. Both species are nearly invisible to psychic senses, which is unusual in a galaxy where almost all biological life has at least some connection to the Imperium. The theory suggesting Catan involvement posits that the star gods, awakening from their long slumber and seeing the galaxy filled with psychically active species, decided they needed a species they could control and manipulate without interference from the warp. The Tau, young and malleable, were perfect candidates. The Catan, or perhaps their Necron servants acting on ancient programming, engineered the ethereals as control mechanisms. They used technology so advanced, it appears like biological evolution, to create a caste that could guide the Tau according to Catan interests. This theory gains some support from Farsight's story. The blade he recovered, which severed his connection to the ethereals, is of unknown origin, but clearly incredibly ancient and powerful. Some speculate it might be C'tan technology. If so, this raises disturbing questions about how a C'tan weapon came to free a Tau from ethereal control. Was it meant to do that? Was Farsight's rebellion part of some larger C'tan plan? Or did he accidentally stumble upon something that revealed the truth about his species' masters? A darker possibility is that the ethereals are the creation of chaos itself. The Tau's lack of warp presence makes them seem like poor targets for chaos corruption, but perhaps that is exactly the point. Perhaps Tzeentch, the architect of fate, created or corrupted the ethereals as a long-term scheme. The greater good could be a mask for something more sinister, a philosophy that will gradually transform the Tau into willing servants of chaos without them ever realizing they have fallen. In this interpretation, the ethereals are demonic in nature, using Xenos biology as a disguise, and their control over other Tau is actually a form of possession or spiritual domination. This theory is supported by scattered references to ethereals behaving in ways that suggest warp influence. During the Crisis of Faith, there is a scene where an Earth-caste scientist becomes possessed by a demon of Tzeentch. The daemon mocks the ethereals and the Tau's ignorance, suggesting it has knowledge about the truth of their society. This could be chaos playing mind games, or it could be a hint that the demons recognize something about the ethereals that the Tau do not. Some theorists have suggested the involvement of the Cabal, the mysterious organization of ancient Xenos species dedicated to fighting chaos. The Cabal operated for millions of years, manipulating events across the galaxy to prevent chaos from consuming reality. Perhaps they saw the Tau as potential allies and engineered the ethereals to guide them. The Cabal is known for taking extreme, long-term approaches to their goals. Creating a control mechanism for an entire species would be well within their methods. One of the more obscure theories suggests involvement by the Old Ones themselves. Yes, the Old Ones disappeared millions of years ago during the War in Heaven. But perhaps they did not all die. Perhaps a few survived, hidden somewhere beyond the galactic rim, or in pocket dimensions inaccessible to other species. Seeing the galaxy threatened by chaos, these survivors might have decided to create one final species, one last attempt to engineer a race that could resist the ruinous powers. The Tau, young and uncorrupted, guided by the engineered ethereals, could be the Old Ones' final gift to the galaxy, or perhaps their final gambit in a war that never truly ended. What makes the ethereal mystery so compelling is that it resonates with deeper questions about free will and control. The Tau believe they have chosen their path, that the greater good is a philosophy they have adopted through reason and enlightenment. But what if their entire civilization is built on a lie? What if every choice they have made has been guided by biological programming they cannot perceive or override? The ethereals do not need to issue commands constantly. Other Tau simply want to obey them, feel compelled to obey them at a level deeper than conscious thought. This is not mind control in the crude sense of psychic domination. This is something more subtle and more terrifying, a form of control that feels like freedom, because the controlled do not realize they are being controlled. Farsight's rebellion takes on new significance in this context. He is perhaps the only Tau who has broken free of ethereal control and survived long enough to establish an alternative society. His enclaves are small, nowhere near the scale of the main Tau empire, but they represent something important. Proof that Tau can exist without ethereals. That the greater good does not require this mysterious caste to function. And yet Farsight has never revealed what he learned from that ancient blade. He has never explained to his followers exactly why he severed ties with the ethereals. He seems to know some truth that he believes his people are not ready to hear. This suggests that whatever the truth about the ethereals might be, it is so disturbing that even Farsight, who has proven himself willing to defy all authority, hesitates to spread it. Perhaps he fears the destabilization it would cause if all Taus suddenly questioned the very foundation of their society. Perhaps he worries that the truth would lead to the very internecine warfare that the ethereals supposedly saved them from. Or perhaps he knows that the ethereals' creators, whoever they are, would not tolerate such revelations and would move to destroy him and everyone he has told. The Tau are unique in the Warhammer 40,000 setting because they represent something that seems almost out of place. Hope. Unlike the Imperium's grinding totalitarianism, the Eldari's terminal decline, the greenskin constant warfare, or the tyrannid endless hunger, the Tau appear to offer a vision of a better future. They preach unity, cooperation, the subordination of individual ambition to collective progress. They welcome other species into their empire, giving them roles and status rather than enslaving or exterminating them. They use sophisticated technology and careful planning rather than relying on faith or brute force. In any other setting, they would be the protagonists, the civilization that readers would root for to triumph against adversity. But this is Warhammer 40,000, and nothing is as it seems. The Tau's apparent virtue, their seeming superiority to the cruel and decaying civilizations around them, might be the greatest deception of all. Because if the ethereals are engineered, if the greater good is imposed rather than chosen, then everything the Tau represent is a lie. Their unity is forced. Their cooperation is programmed. Their better future is a cage dressed up to look like paradise. And the worst part is that the Tau themselves do not know, may never be able to know, because the mechanism of their control operates at a level below consciousness. This is the genius of the mystery. The Tau are simultaneously the most idealistic and potentially the most tragic faction in the setting. They believe they have escaped the darkness that consumes the rest of the galaxy, that they have found a path forward based on reason and cooperation. But if the theories are true, if there are hidden masters pulling their strings, then their escape was an illusion. They remain trapped, perhaps more thoroughly than any other species, because the bars of their prison are invisible even to them. In the grand scheme of 40,000, the Tau are still young. Their empire is tiny compared to the Imperium, their technology laughable compared to Necron science, their psychic power non-existent compared to the Eldari. But they grow quickly. Each sphere of expansion has reached farther, incorporated more worlds, added more species to their alliance. If they continue at this rate, they could become a genuine galactic power within a few centuries. And then, the question of who controls them becomes critical. Because whoever created the ethereals, whoever pulls their strings, would suddenly have access to an empire spanning thousands of worlds. An empire built on the most effective propaganda the galaxy has ever seen. The lie that it is not an empire at all, but a voluntary association working toward the common good. The greater good might be humanity's doom, or it might be the galaxy's salvation, or it might be something else entirely. A tool wielded by ancient hands toward purposes we cannot yet comprehend. The only thing we know for certain is that the Tau are not what they seem, and the ethereals, those mysterious saviors who appeared out of storms and saved a dying species, are the key to understanding what the Tau truly are and what they will become. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is hope. But that hope might be the most terrible deception of all. Alfarius and Omegon, the twin Primarch paradox. There is a phrase that has become legendary within the Warhammer 40,000 community. 3 words that capture everything about the most mysterious of all the Primarchs. I am Alfarius. It is a statement of identity, a challenge, a deception, and possibly a truth, all wrapped together. Because with the Alpha Legion and their Primarch or Primarchs, nothing is ever straightforward. Did Rogel Dawn kill Alfarius on Pluto, or was it Omegon? Are both twins still alive, or are both dead? Or is one dead and one alive? And do those questions even matter when every member of the Alpha Legion is trained to claim the identity of their Primarch? when the very concept of individual identity seems to be something the 20th Legion has deliberately dissolved. The greatest secret about the Alpha Legion Primarch is that he is not one being, but two. Alfarius and Omegon, identical twin Primarchs who somehow avoided the Emperor's notice, or perhaps were designed that way from the beginning. This alone makes them unique among the 20 sons of the Emperor. All the other Primarchs were singular beings, individuals with distinct personalities and fates. But Alfarius and Omegon were plural, a hydra with two heads, and their dual nature has shaped everything about their legion and their role in the heresy. According to Alfarius's own account, which may or may not be true, he was the first Primarch found, not the last, as official records claim, but the first. The infant Alfarius never made it far from Terra when the Chaos Gods scattered the Primarchs across the galaxy. He was recovered almost immediately by the Emperor, but kept secret. Why? Perhaps the Emperor wanted a hidden weapon, a Primarch whose existence was not publicly known. Perhaps he was testing whether one of his sons could be raised properly, with full knowledge of the Imperium and its purpose, rather than growing up on some primitive world. Or perhaps the Emperor recognized something about Alfarius that made him want to keep this particular son close and secret. During his hidden years, Alfarius learned subterfuge and manipulation from Malcador the Sigillite himself. He walked among the early legions disguised as an ordinary space marine, present at critical moments in the early crusade while everyone assumed all the Primarchs remained lost. This gave him a unique perspective. While his brothers saw the crusade from the position of demigods, Alfarius saw it from the ground level. He understood how the Imperium actually functioned, how orders were carried out, how individuals made decisions. And he learned that a single person in the right place at the right time could change the course of events as surely as any fleet of battleships or army of space marines. But Alfarius was not alone. Somewhere in the galaxy, on the world of Barseva, his twin brother fought for survival against the Sloth, horrifying psychic parasites that enslaved and consumed their victims. Omegon had no knowledge of the Imperium, no training from Malcador, no understanding of his purpose. He fought simply to survive, developing skills of infiltration and assassination out of necessity. When Alfarius finally located him during the Rangdan genocides, their reunion was instant and complete. They were two halves of a single whole, finally brought together. The twins made a decision that day. They would not reveal their dual nature even to the Emperor. They would keep the existence of Omegon secret, allowing one or the other to play the role of Alfarius as circumstances required. Why? Perhaps they feared the Emperor's reaction. Perhaps they wanted the tactical advantage of having two Primarchs who could appear to be in two places at once. Or perhaps they simply understood that in a universe of unique beings, being able to duplicate yourself was the ultimate form of deception. This duplicity extended to everything the Alpha Legion did. Under their Primarch's guidance, the Legion developed tactics focused on infiltration, misdirection, and decentralized command. They did not fight as a united force the way other legions did. Instead, they fractured into countless cells, each operating independently toward common goals. And most disturbing of all, they began a practice that would define them. Every member of the Alpha Legion was surgically altered to resemble their Primarch, or Primarchs. The physical distinctions between Alfarius, Omegon, and their captains were erased. Anyone could be Alfarius. Anyone could claim that name and have some validity in doing so. This was anathema to the other Primarchs' way of thinking. Their legions were extensions of their personalities, and command structures flowed from them down through clearly defined hierarchies. But the Alpha Legion recognized that centralized command was a weakness. Kill the leader, and the organization falls apart. But if there is no single leader, if everyone can be the leader, then the organization becomes nearly impossible to destroy. Cut off one head, and two grow in its place. The Hydra's nature made manifest. When the Horus heresy erupted, the Alpha Legion's loyalties were immediately suspect. They sided with Horus, of course. Or did they? Alpharius, or possibly Omegon, had grown close to the War Master during the early Crusade, but the twins had also been contacted by the Cabal, that ancient organization of Xenos dedicated to fighting chaos. The Cabal showed them visions of two possible futures. In one, Horus won the war. Chaos would consume him completely, and in his anguish at what he had become, Horus would wage such a destructive campaign that humanity would be driven to extinction within a few generations. But this extinction would also starve chaos, causing all four gods to wither and die. The galaxy would be cleansed of humanity's taint, and other species would have a chance to prosper free of chaos's influence. In the other vision, the Emperor triumphed. He would be crippled and enthroned, neither dead nor truly alive. And under his corpse's guidance, the Imperium would fall into 10,000 years of stagnation, superstition, and slow decay. Chaos would grow stronger, feeding on the suffering and despair of humanity's vast population. Eventually, chaos would consume everything, achieving total victory across the galaxy. Faced with these visions, Alpharius and Omegon made their choice. They would side with Horus, not because they believed in his cause, but because they believed in the Cabal's prophecy. They would help Horus win in order to ensure humanity's extinction and chaos's destruction. They would betray the Emperor to save the galaxy, or at least that was one interpretation of their actions, because the Alpha Legion also fought against Horus. They sabotaged traitor operations. They provided intelligence to loyalist forces. They appeared to be working at cross purposes to their own stated goals. Were they playing both sides, hedging their bets in case the Cabal's visions were wrong? Were different elements of the Legion following different orders, some working toward Horus's victory, while others ensured his defeat? Or was there a deeper game being played, a third option that neither the Cabal nor anyone else had foreseen? Then came Pluto. The Alpha Legion launched a surprise attack on the Sol System's outermost defenses, seeking to pave the way for Horus's assault on Terra. Rogel Dawn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, led the defense, and in the fighting, he killed Alpharius. Or at least, he killed someone claiming to be Alpharius. The body was recovered. The death was confirmed by those who witnessed it. But was it truly Alpharius who died? Or was it Omegon? Or was it some other member of the Alpha Legion, willingly taking on their Primarch's identity for the sake of the mission? Far from the battlefield, one of the twins felt his brother die, or at least, he felt something that convinced him his brother was dead. And he took up the name Alpharius, becoming what his brother had been. But which one survived? The cunning strategist who had been raised by Malcador, or the survivor who had fought the sloth? Does it matter? They described themselves as one soul in two bodies. If one body died, the soul remained. Alpharius lives, whoever Alpharius is now. The Alpha Legion continued to operate throughout the heresy and into the scouring that followed. They fought for the traitors, or against them, or possibly both simultaneously. They established hidden cells throughout the Imperium. They infiltrated loyal chapters. They sabotaged Imperial operations or protected them. Every action could be interpreted multiple ways, and no one outside the Legion could say with certainty what the Alpha Legion's true goal was. And then, centuries later, there was Escrador, a world where the Ultramarines ambushed an Alpha Legion force and killed Alpharius. Again. Robut Gilliman himself claimed this victory, another Primarch slaying the Hydra's head. But by this point, the phrase, "I am Alpharius," had become so thoroughly embedded in the Legion's culture that his death meant nothing. The Alpha Legion continued as if nothing had happened. Perhaps the individual who died was truly one of the twin Primarchs. Perhaps it was just another operative trained to take on that role. The Ultramarines claimed victory, but the war against the Alpha Legion never ended. In the current timeline of Warhammer 40,000, the Alpha Legion remains active. They operate in the Eye of Terror, or in the Imperium, or possibly both. They claim loyalty to Chaos, or to the Imperium, or to their own inscrutable agenda. Some elements seem dedicated to Chaos gods. Others appear to be working against Chaos. Some seek to destroy the Imperium. Others seem to be protecting it from worse fates. There is no unified Alpha Legion anymore, if there ever was one. There are only scattered cells following missions assigned by dead Primarchs toward goals that may have become irrelevant millennia ago. The tragedy of the Alpha Legion is that they might be the most loyal of all the Primarch's sons. If the Cabal's visions were true, if they really did betray the Emperor to save the galaxy from something worse, then they sacrificed everything for the greater good. They branded themselves traitors. They fought their own brothers. They turned away from the light of the Astronomicon. And they did it believing they were saving everyone, even if no one else would ever know or understand. But the Cabal was wrong, or at least their visions did not come to pass as predicted. Horus lost. The Emperor survived, in a fashion. The Imperium endured, and the Alpha Legion, committed to a plan that failed, splintered into factions following contradictory missions in service of purposes that may no longer exist. They became ghosts, shadows of what they were meant to be, still fighting a war they can no longer win for reasons they can no longer articulate. Or perhaps that is exactly what they want everyone to think. Perhaps the fragmentation is deliberate. Perhaps the apparent chaos is actually perfect coordination towards some master plan so complex that even its participants do not fully understand their role. Perhaps Alfarius or Omegan, or both, are still alive somewhere, still pulling strings, still believing that eventually their sacrifices will be vindicated. This is why the I am Alfarius phrase resonates so deeply. It is not just a statement of identity, it is an acknowledgement that identity itself has become meaningless within the Legion. Every Alpha Legionnaire is Alfarius, in the sense that they carry on his mission. None of them are Alfarius in the sense that the original being who bore that name is gone, destroyed by the very tactics he pioneered. The Primarch who could be anyone has become everyone and no one simultaneously. The mystery of Alfarius and Omegan is ultimately a question about the nature of loyalty and sacrifice. Can you be loyal to something if you betray it? Can you serve the Imperium by fighting against it? And if you sacrifice everything, including truth itself, in pursuit of a goal that may be impossible to achieve, does that make you a hero or simply another victim of the grimdark universe's cruelty? The Alpha Legion would answer that these questions miss the point. The mission continues, the Hydra endures, and somewhere, in the shadows, at the edge of the Imperium, or deep within the Eye of Terror, or possibly sitting across from you wearing a loyalist's colors, Alfarius is watching, waiting, planning, always 3 steps ahead, always playing both sides, always pursuing goals that cannot be articulated, because articulation would compromise their achievement. I am Alfarius. You are Alfarius. We are all Alfarius. And Alfarius is dead. And Alfarius will never die. All these statements are true simultaneously. And that, perhaps, is the only truth about the Alpha Legion that matters. The Star Child and the Emperor's rebirth. Upon the Golden Throne, a corpse sits. Or perhaps not quite a corpse. Something that was once a man. Once the most powerful human psyker ever to live, now reduced to a withered husk, kept functional only by technology so ancient that the Mechanicus can barely maintain it. The Emperor of mankind, Master of humanity, God of the Imperium, Father of the Primarchs, sits upon his throne and slowly, imperceptibly, dies, and has been dying for 10,000 years. The question that haunts the Imperium's faithful is not whether he will die, but what happens when he finally does. Will it be the end of everything, or could it be the beginning of something new? The Star Child theory is one of the oldest in Warhammer 40,000 lore, dating back to the earliest editions of the game. It suggests that the Emperor's death would not be an ending, but a transformation. That when the Golden Throne finally fails and his body ceases its undead function, his soul would be free to do what human souls do when their body dies. It would enter the warp, and there, in the realm of souls and thoughts and dreams, it would be reborn. But this would not be a simple reincarnation. The Emperor is not a normal human. He is, according to ancient lore, the collective reincarnation of thousands of prehistoric shamans who willingly sacrificed themselves to create a being powerful enough to guide humanity through the millennia ahead. His soul, if such a fragmented and complex thing can be called a soul, has endured for at least 40,000 years, possibly longer. And for 10,000 of those years, it has been sustained by the sacrifice of 1,000 psykers every single day. All that psychic energy has to go somewhere. The theory suggests it is being stored, accumulated in the warp around the Emperor's presence, that he is slowly growing stronger even as his body decays, that the worship of trillions of humans, the daily sacrifice of psykers, the very act of anchoring the Astronomicon beacon, all of it is feeding something vast and terrible in the warp. The Emperor is dying. But the God Emperor, the entity that humanity's faith has been building for 10 millennia, is growing stronger. When the Golden Throne fails, when the Emperor's body finally gives out completely, two things will happen simultaneously. First, terror will fall. Without the Astronomicon, warp travel becomes exponentially more dangerous. Without the Emperor's psychic presence holding closed the webway breach beneath the palace, that wound in reality will tear open, flooding terror with demons. The Sol System, humanity's ancient birthplace, will become another eye of terror, a realm where the warp and reality merge. The Imperium's ability to coordinate its forces will collapse. Hive worlds will starve without trade ships. Forge worlds will go dark without fuel. Chaos will surge through the galaxy like a tsunami. But second, in the warp, something else will happen. The Emperor's soul, finally freed from the prison of his body in the Golden Throne, will emerge. Not as the man he was, but as something new, the Star Child, a nascent god born from humanity's desperate faith and the accumulated sacrifice of millennia. And this god, unlike the crude chaos gods who represent only the worst of mortal emotion, would represent something else. Hope, perhaps. Humanity's desperate desire for protection and guidance. The belief that somewhere, someone cares about their suffering and works to end it. The Star Child would not be the Emperor as we know him. 10,000 years have passed. Trillions of humans have prayed to an image of the Emperor that bears little resemblance to the man who walked the palace halls during the Great Crusade. They pray to the God Emperor, the perfect master, the omniscient father, and in the warp, where belief shapes reality, that God Emperor would take form. Not the rationalist conqueror who rejected all religion, but the divine tyrant that the ecclesiarchy has spent 10 millennia creating in their propaganda. The implications are staggering. If the theory is true, if the Emperor's death would lead to his rebirth as a true god, then everything the Imperium has done becomes justified. All the suffering, all the sacrifice, all the billions dead in his name would have served a purpose. They would have built something capable of saving what remains. The grimdark universe would offer, for once, something approaching hope. But this is Warhammer 40,000, and nothing is that simple. Because what would this newborn god do? Would he remember his former purpose? His plan to unite humanity and shield it from chaos? Or would he be shaped entirely by the prayers of his worshippers, becoming only what they believe he is? The Imperial Creed teaches that the Emperor protects, but it also teaches that Xenos must be purged, that mutation must be destroyed, that deviation from Imperial doctrine is heresy punishable by death. Would a god born from that belief system be a savior, or simply another tyrant, divine in power, but no less cruel than the regime built in his name? There is a darker interpretation of the Star Child theory. What if the Emperor's transformation into a god is not a hope for humanity, but its doom. What if becoming a god means losing the last vestiges of humanity, the last connection to mortal concerns? Gods operate on different timescales. They pursue goals that mortals cannot comprehend. The Chaos gods care nothing for individual humans, seeing them only as sources of emotional energy to feed upon. Why would a god born from humanity's faith be any different? The Emperor might be reborn as a god, and that god might see humanity not as children to protect, but as resources to expend, believers whose faith sustains his divine existence. A galactic cult maintaining the system that keeps him powerful. In trying to save the Emperor, humanity might have created their own enslaver, a divine entity that needs their worship to exist and will do anything to ensure that worship continues. Consider what we know about gods in the warp. They do not die in any conventional sense. When a god is born, it has always existed, stretching backward and forward through time, because time does not work the same way in the warp. If the Emperor becomes a god, he would have always been a god from the warp's perspective. This raises disturbing questions about causality. Has the Emperor's transformation already occurred? Is the entity sitting on the golden throne even the Emperor anymore? Or is it already the Star Child, playing out its role in linear time to ensure its own existence? Some versions of the theory suggest that the Emperor anticipated this, that his plan all along was to die on the golden throne, to be sustained just long enough for humanity's faith to build the entity in the warp that would emerge when he finally let go. That the heresy, his entombment, the entire 10,000-year decline of the Imperium into superstition and fanaticism, all of it was part of a plan to create a god powerful enough to defeat chaos. The Emperor rejected divinity during his life, but perhaps he always intended to embrace it in death. This interpretation makes the Emperor's suffering purposeful rather than tragic. Every moment he has spent in agony on the golden throne, every psyche sacrificed to sustain him, every atrocity committed in his name by an Imperium he no longer controls, all of it has been building toward a single moment of transformation. The Emperor endures not because the golden throne traps him, but because he chooses to endure, waiting for the right moment to release his hold on mortality and ascend. But if that is true, why has he not done so already? If the goal was always to become a god, if humanity's faith has been building that divine entity for 10 millennia, why remain on the throne? Perhaps the transformation requires specific conditions that have not yet been met. Perhaps the Emperor is waiting for a particular conjunction of events, a moment when his rebirth will have maximum impact. Or perhaps he is held back by doubt. Because becoming a god means abandoning humanity as it exists, sacrificing the present for a possible future, gambling everything on a transformation that may or may not save anything worth saving. Recent lore has suggested that the Emperor is changing even now. When Guilliman was resurrected and finally spoke with his father, he found not the man he remembered, but something cold and distant, barely recognizable as the individual who had created him. Other characters who have encountered the Emperor's presence in the warp describe it as vast and terrible, more storm than person. Perhaps the transformation is already occurring gradually, inexorably. Perhaps the Star Child is not waiting to be born, but is already growing, already eclipsing the man who was. And one day soon, the remnant of humanity that still clings to the Emperor will simply evaporate, leaving only the god behind. The Eldar have shown interest in the Emperor's fate. Some of their farseers have suggested that he should be allowed to die, that his rebirth would be beneficial, not just for humanity, but for the galaxy as a whole. This is remarkable, coming from a species that typically cares nothing for lesser races' well-being. But the Eldar understand the warp in ways humanity does not. They know what happens when gods are born. They experienced it firsthand when Slaanesh tore into existence, destroying their empire and creating the Eye of Terror. Perhaps they see in the Emperor's potential rebirth an opportunity to change the balance of power in the warp. Perhaps they believe a god born from humanity could oppose chaos in ways that no god born from the Elder ever could. Or perhaps they simply want the Emperor to die, because his death would cripple the Imperium, removing humanity as a major threat to Eldar interests. The Elder are not above lying about their visions if it serves their purposes. Their advice to let the Emperor die should be viewed with maximum suspicion. The Star Child theory appeals because it offers narrative closure to the Emperor's suffering. He has endured 10,000 years of agony for a purpose. His sacrifice will be redeemed. The faithful who died in his name will be vindicated. But narrative closure is not something Warhammer 40,000 typically provides. The setting is defined by endlessness, by wars that never end and suffering that never achieves meaning. To give the Emperor a happy ending, or any ending at all, would fundamentally change what the setting is. And yet the theory persists. It appears and reappears in various forms across decades of lore. Sometimes it is presented as a plan that could save the Imperium. Sometimes it is hinted at as an apocalyptic event to be feared. But it never quite goes away, never gets definitively confirmed or denied. Like so many aspects of Warhammer 40,000 lore, it exists in a state of superposition, simultaneously possible and impossible, true and false, hope and doom. Perhaps that ambiguity is the point. The Emperor's fate is unknowable because it represents the future of humanity itself. Will we transcend our limitations and become something greater? Or will we be consumed by our own worst impulses, transformed into monsters by the very power we sought to wield? The Emperor could become a god who saves humanity, or he could become a god who enslaves it, or he could simply die, and in dying, prove that there was never anything divine about him at all, that he was just a very old, very powerful man who made mistakes and suffered consequences like anyone else. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is perhaps only one certainty. The Golden Throne is failing, the Emperor's body is decaying, and one day, sooner or later, the last sacrifice will be fed into the throne, the last prayer will be said, and we will discover what happens when the God Emperor finally, truly, dies. Whether that death is an ending or a beginning, whether it brings salvation or damnation, is something we can only speculate about. But we will find out. In time, we will all find out, and the galaxy will never be the same again. The power of belief, greenskin reality, warping. There is a moment, early in many Space Marine deployments, where they first encounter greenskin forces. The reports come back confused, contradictory. The greenskins were observed firing crude weapons assembled from scrap metal, yet these weapons are somehow effective against ceramite armor. Their vehicles consist of plates bolted together without proper engineering, yet they move faster than equivalent Imperial designs. Their leaders are massive, brutal creatures who should not be able to coordinate complex tactical maneuvers, yet they do so with horrifying effectiveness. The reports conclude, inevitably, that greenskin technology should not work, but it does. The greenskins, colloquially known as orcs, are one of the oldest and most numerous xenospecies in the galaxy. They are also, according to a theory that has gained substantial traction within the community, reality warpers. Not psychic in the conventional sense, though they clearly have some connection to the warp. Instead, they operate according to a principle so simple that it sounds absurd. If enough greenskins believe something is true, it becomes true. Their collective faith alters reality itself, bending physics to conform to their expectations. The evidence for this theory is everywhere once you start looking for it. Greenskin weapons are painted red because greenskins believe red makes things go faster. And when a greenskin vehicle is painted red, it does, measurably, move faster than it did before. Not because of any aerodynamic principle or mechanical enhancement, but because the greenskins believe it should, and reality accommodates that belief. Purple is for stealth, yellow for explosiveness, blue for luck. Each color conveys a property not through any physical mechanism, but through collective faith. The greenskins have stumbled onto something fundamental about the nature of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, whether they understand it or not. Their technology reinforces this. A greenskin weapon might consist of a tube, a spring, and a firing pin with nothing that should logically propel a projectile. Yet in greenskin hands, it fires as effectively as a bolter. Take that same weapon and give it to a human, and it becomes inert, just scrap metal that occasionally misfires. The difference is belief. The greenskin knows it is a weapon, believes it will fire, and so it does. The human knows it should not work, believes it cannot work, and so it does not. This extends to their leaders. A greenskin warboss can achieve impossible feats of strength and cunning, not because of superior genetics or training, but because every greenskin under his command believes he is the biggest, strongest, smartest orc around. That collective belief makes him so. It grants him strength beyond what his muscle mass should allow, combat prowess that transcends his neurological capacity, tactical acumen that his brain structure cannot support. He is what his followers believe him to be, and he remains so for as long as that belief persists. When a warboss is killed, the power dynamic among the greenskins shifts instantly. The next most powerful orc does not inherit the previous boss's strength. Instead, the collective belief of the tribe transfers to the new boss, making him stronger in the process. This is why greenskin succession is so violent. It is not just about physical combat. It is about establishing in the minds of every greenskin present who is now the biggest and strongest. The winner of that contest becomes the boss, not because he was strongest to begin with, but because winning the contest made him strongest. The theory suggests that this reality warping ability is not accidental, but designed. The greenskins are descended from the Krork, a species engineered by the Old Ones as soldiers in the war in heaven. The Old Ones were masters of psychic manipulation and understood the warp better than any species currently active in the galaxy. They created the Aeldari as a psychic species capable of wielding warp power directly. But perhaps they also created the Krork with a different approach to warp manipulation. Instead of individual psychers channeling warp energy, the Krork would collectively alter reality through their Gestalt field, a web of subconscious psychic connections linking every greenskin into a loosely coordinated whole. This field serves multiple purposes. It allows greenskins to coordinate without sophisticated communication. When a warboss decides on a strategy, every greenskin under his command somehow knows what to do, even if he never spoke to them directly. They move together, fight together, die together, without needing the kind of command structure that other armies require. The Gestalt field connects them at a level below conscious thought. But more importantly, the field shapes reality according to their collective expectations. If all the greenskins believe their weapons will fire, the Gestalt field makes it so, bending probability and physics in subtle ways that add up to make the impossible work. If they believe their boss is the strongest, the field enhances his abilities to match that belief. If they believe they are winning, they become more dangerous, while if they believe they are losing, they become weaker and more cowardly. This has profound implications for how to fight greenskin forces. Physical superiority is not enough. You must also break their belief, make them doubt that they can win, and their weapons begin to fail, their coordination breaks down, their leaders become vulnerable. This is why the greenskins are so dangerous in large numbers, but collapse rapidly once their momentum is broken. The Gestalt field amplifies confidence and multiplies power, but it also amplifies doubt and fear. The theory also explains why greenskins are so focused on fighting. It is not merely that they are aggressive by nature, though that is certainly true. It is that combat is where their reality warping abilities are most effective. In the midst of battle, when adrenaline is high and thoughts are simple, the Gestalt field reaches peak efficiency. Every greenskin knows what they are supposed to do: fight, kill, survive. And so the field makes them better at doing exactly that. Their weapons work more reliably, Their vehicles move faster. Their leaders become cunning tacticians. The greenskins are at their strongest when they are doing what they believe they were made to do. This raises questions about what would happen if the greenskins ever achieved a level of organization that approached the Krork of old. The modern greenskin is a degenerate version of their ancestors, smaller, weaker, less intelligent, but they retain the Gestalt field. What would happen if they unified under a single leader, if their collective belief was focused entirely on a single purpose? The War of the Beast provides some indication. That conflict saw greenskins achieve a level of coordination and sophistication that nearly destroyed the Imperium. Their technology approached what the Krork once wielded. Their numbers grew to unfathomable levels, and they very nearly won. The beast itself was a greenskin of unusual size and intelligence, possibly approaching what the Krork were before their decline. It coordinated multiple war fronts, employed strategy that defied greenskin stereotypes, and demonstrated the ability to create technology that should have been beyond any greenskin civilization. All because it had the belief of every greenskin in the galaxy behind it. The collective power of the Gestalt field, focused through a single leader, made the impossible routine. This suggests that the real threat from greenskins is not their current capabilities, but their potential. Given the right circumstances, given a leader capable of unifying them, greenskins could become the dominant force in the galaxy, not through superior technology or psychic power, but through the simple fact that they believe they can win, and reality bends to accommodate that belief. Some theorists have extended this further, suggesting that the entire greenskin life cycle is shaped by the Gestalt field. Greenskins reproduce through spores, a biological mechanism that should not work as efficiently as it does. But perhaps the spores propagate so successfully because the greenskins believe they will. Perhaps the growth rate of greenskin populations is not fixed by biology, but shaped by the Gestalt field's influence on reality. This would explain why greenskin populations can explode so rapidly, even after devastating losses. The survivors believe more greenskins will emerge, and so they do. There is a symmetry between the greenskins and humanity that the theory makes explicit. Humanity's collective belief may be creating the Emperor as a god in the warp. The greenskins' collective belief makes their technology work and their leaders powerful. Both species are reality warpers, but they operate according to different principles. Humanity's power flows through the warp, requiring psychic conduits and prone to chaos corruption. The greenskins' power operates through their Gestalt field, distributed across their entire population, too diffuse and simple to be corrupted by the chaos gods. This might explain why chaos has never successfully corrupted a significant greenskin population. The chaos gods feed on sophisticated emotions, despair, rage, ambition, excess. But greenskins do not experience emotions with that kind of complexity. They are happy when they fight. They are disappointed when they do not. Their emotional lives are too simple to provide the chaos gods with meaningful sustenance. Moreover, the Gestalt field seems to provide some protection against warp influence, maintaining the greenskins' simple worldview even in the face of phenomena that would drive other species to madness. The greenskins may be the most successful species in the galaxy, at least by raw numbers and territorial control. They infest every corner of inhabited space. They recover from defeats that would destroy other civilizations. They cannot be reasoned with or deterred, only temporarily suppressed until their populations build back up. And according to this theory, they are successful because reality itself is on their side, not in any mystical sense, but in a very practical one. The universe in which they live is shaped by consciousness, and while individual greenskins are not particularly conscious, collectively they form a psychic engine that makes their simplistic beliefs become truth. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But for the greenskins, war is not a tragedy or a burden. It is simply what is. And because they believe it should be so, it is. Their reality warping ensures that war will always exist, that there will always be enemies to fight, that the galaxy will never know peace. Not because they are particularly evil or malicious, but because they cannot conceive of a universe where fighting is not the central activity of existence. And so, through the power of collective belief, they make it true. The Cabal and cosmic conspiracies, shadowy Xenos, and impossible plans. In a galaxy full of ancient species and civilizations that measure their history in millions of years, there are organizations that operate on timescales that dwarf even the longest-lived races. The Cabal is one such organization. A shadowy alliance of Xenos species, some known, most unknown, united by a single purpose: to prevent the Chaos Gods from consuming the galaxy. Their methods are subtle, their plans extend across millennia, and their willingness to sacrifice entire civilizations for the greater good makes them simultaneously humanity's potential saviors and its greatest threat. The Cabal revealed itself to Alpharius and Omegon during the Horus heresy. They showed the twin Primarchs visions of two possible futures. If the Emperor triumphed, humanity would stagnate for 10,000 years under the withered corpse god's psychic shadow, and chaos would slowly grow stronger until it consumed everything. If Horus won, humanity would be driven to extinction within a few generations, but this extinction would starve chaos and save the galaxy from its influence. Faced with this choice, the Alpha Legion chose damnation. They sided with Horus to save the galaxy, even though it meant betraying everything they had sworn to protect. But this raises questions about the Cabal itself. Who were they? How did they know what would happen? And were their visions actually true? Or were they manipulating the Alpha Legion for their own purposes? The Cabal claimed to have existed for millions of years, operating in the shadows to combat chaos. But if they were so powerful, so knowledgeable, why did they need the Alpha Legion at all? Why not intervene directly to ensure the outcome they desired? Some theories suggest the Cabal was never what it claimed to be, that it was not truly fighting against chaos, but serving it, possibly without realizing it. The visions they showed Alpharius could have been lies, designed to ensure the heresy succeeded. By convincing one of the Primarchs that siding with Horus was the only way to save the galaxy, chaos gained a powerful ally and sowed confusion that persists to this day. The Alpha Legion's betrayal served chaos perfectly, providing strategic advantages and ideological cover for their treachery. And it cost the Cabal nothing if they never truly existed as described. Alternatively, the Cabal could have been genuine in their purpose, but catastrophically wrong in their conclusions. They claim to see the future, but the warp does not flow linearly. Prophecy is treacherous, showing possibilities rather than certainties. The Cabal's seers might have seen true visions of possible futures, but misinterpreted them. They thought they understood how the Emperor's victory would doom the galaxy, when in fact it was the least bad option. Their attempt to help may have been nothing more than cosmic hubris. Ancient Xenos believing they understood more than they did. A more disturbing theory suggests the Cabal was a pawn of even greater powers. Perhaps the Old Ones, or beings that predated them, manipulated the Cabal into manipulating the Primarchs. Perhaps the entire heresy was engineered from outside the galaxy by intelligences so alien that their very existence challenges the concept of life. The Tyranids are coming from somewhere. Something drove them to this galaxy. Perhaps that same something arranged events to weaken the galaxy's defenses, using the Cabal as a tool without the Xenos ever realizing they were being used. What makes the Cabal particularly interesting is that it represents something rarely seen in Warhammer 40,000, cooperation between Xenos species. The Imperium is built on the principle of human supremacy. The Elder are too arrogant to work with lesser species except under the most dire circumstances. Even the Tau Empire, for all its talk of the greater good, is ultimately controlled by a single species. But the Cabal consisted of multiple Xenos species, working in genuine partnership toward a common goal. This alone makes them unique, and suggests they had access to knowledge or resources that other organizations lack. The composition of the Cabal is telling. Among its known members were Eldar, humans including several perpetuals and various other Xenos species. Each brought different skills and perspectives. The Eldar contributed psychic foresight. The perpetuals provided historical continuity across thousands of years. The other Xenos offered abilities we can only speculate about. Together, they formed an organization that could operate across multiple timelines simultaneously, coordinating plans that spanned from prehistory to the far future. But where is the Cabal now? After their visions failed to come true, after Horus was defeated and the Emperor survived, the Cabal seemingly vanished. There are no references to them in current timeline lore. They either disbanded, were destroyed, or went deeper underground. Some theorists suggest they are still active, operating through proxies and manipulating events toward goals we cannot perceive. Others argue they were always a fiction, a narrative device to explain the Alpha Legion's betrayal and nothing more. If the Cabal still exists, what are they planning now? The galaxy is arguably in worse shape than it was during the heresy. The Great Rift has split the Imperium in half. Chaos incursions have multiplied. The Tyranids advance on multiple fronts. The Necrons awaken from their long slumber. If the Cabal's purpose was to prevent chaos from consuming the galaxy, they have failed spectacularly, unless their plans operate on timescales so vast that current events are merely momentary setbacks. Unless they are still working towards some endgame that will not become apparent for centuries or millennia more. One theory suggests the Cabal might be connected to the Tau. The sudden appearance and rapid advancement of Tau civilization matches the Cabal's patterns of intervention. They manipulate existing species rather than creating new ones, and they work through subtlety rather than force. Perhaps the Ethereals are Cabal operatives or Cabal-designed control mechanisms. Perhaps the entire Tau Empire is a Cabal project, an attempt to create a civilization that can resist chaos while not being hobbled by the Imperium's dogma or the Eldar's decline. This would explain why the Tau have advanced so quickly and why certain Eldar Farseers seem protective of them. Alternatively, the Cabal might be working through humanity itself, not through the Imperium, which is too rigid and dogmatic, but through rebel elements. Perhaps they support Chaos Space Marine warbands, not because they serve chaos, but because chaos forces are the only ones capable of striking at the Imperium's heart. Perhaps they manipulate heretic movements and secessionist worlds, trying to break up the Imperium into smaller, more manageable pieces that can resist chaos more effectively. This would make them enemies of the Imperium, while still technically working to save humanity. The most unsettling theory is that the Cabal might have been right, that the Emperor's victory was indeed the worst possible outcome, that 10,000 years of stagnation has strengthened chaos more than Horus's brief reign of terror ever could have. That humanity would have been better off going extinct, and the Cabal's plan to achieve that extinction was actually the galaxy's best hope. If this is true, then the Imperium has been damned since the Siege of Terror. Everything it has done, every world it has saved, every heresy it has crushed, has only fed the Chaos Gods, and there is no escape now. The moment when extinction could have starved chaos has passed. Humanity is too numerous, too widespread. Even if the entire species died tomorrow, the emotional energy already released into the warp would sustain chaos for eons. But that is a bleak conclusion, even by Warhammer 40,000 standards. So, perhaps we should consider a more hopeful interpretation. Perhaps the Cabal was wrong and their visions were incomplete. Perhaps there is a third option they did not foresee, a way forward that avoids both the extinction of humanity and the triumph of chaos. Perhaps the Emperor's entombment, while creating 10,000 years of suffering, also gave humanity time to spread across the galaxy so thoroughly that it became immune to single-point failures. Perhaps the current crisis is not the end, but a transition to something new. The Cabal, if it still exists, might be working toward that third option now. not trying to destroy humanity or save the Imperium, but preparing the galaxy for whatever comes next, facilitating the awakening of the Necrons, who are immune to chaos, protecting the Tau, who might offer an alternative to the Imperium's dystopia, manipulating events to ensure that when the Emperor finally dies and the Imperium collapses, there will be something to take its place. Multiple civilizations, none dominant, all working together because they have no choice. The Cabal's vision of a post-chaos galaxy, achieved not through humanity's extinction, but through its evolution. This is speculation piled upon speculation, theories explaining theories with no solid ground beneath them, which is appropriate because that is what the Cabal represents, the unknowable, the conspiracy so deep that even recognizing its existence is suspect. They might have saved the galaxy. They might have doomed it. They might have been real or imaginary, competent or deluded, well-intentioned or malevolent. We will never know for certain. And that uncertainty, that inability to determine whether we were helped or hindered by forces beyond our comprehension, is perhaps the most frightening thing about them. In the grim darkness of the far future, even those who claim to fight chaos might serve it unknowingly. Even those who see the future might misinterpret what they see, and even those who sacrifice everything for the greater good might discover too late that they sacrificed it for nothing. The Cabal stands as a warning about the dangers of certainty, of believing that any plan, no matter how well-intentioned, can account for every variable in a galaxy ruled by impossible physics and gods that feed on emotion. They tried to save everything and may have accomplished nothing, or they may have saved us all, and we are too blind to see it yet. Time will tell, or it will not. In the end, perhaps that is the only thing we can be certain of. Conclusion. The beauty of uncertainty. We have journeyed through shadow, examined mysteries that may have no solutions, explored theories that might be simultaneously true and false. From the Emperor's potential transformation into a chaos god, to the lost Primarch's deliberately erased existence, from the Tyrannid's unknown origins to the Ethereal's impossible control over Tau society, from Alpharius and Omegon's identities that dissolve into paradox to the Starchild waiting to be born or already existing, from the Greenskins' reality-warping beliefs to the Cabal's incomprehensible manipulations, we have touched upon the fundamental truth of Warhammer 40,000. Nothing is certain. Everything is contested. And that ambiguity is not a flaw, but the very foundation upon which this universe is built. Games Workshop has created something remarkable with this setting. A fictional universe that acknowledges its own fictional nature through unreliable narrators, contradictory accounts, and deliberate gaps in the lore. Every codex, every novel, every piece of official material comes with the caveat that it represents one perspective among many. The Imperium believes one thing. The Chaos Space Marines believe another. The Xenos factions have their own interpretations. And somewhere in the space between all these competing narratives lies something that might charitably be called truth, though even that is contested. This approach to world-building is unusual. Most fictional settings strive for internal consistency. They establish rules and follow them. They answer questions definitively. They want readers to know what is true within the fiction so they can engage with it more deeply. But Warhammer 40,000 does the opposite. It deliberately refuses to provide definitive answers to its biggest questions. It leaves mysteries unresolved. It allows contradictions to stand. And in doing so, it creates a setting that feels more alive, more real in its ambiguity than most fictional worlds manage with all their carefully documented consistency. Because this is how real history works. Not the sanitized, organized version we get in textbooks, but history as experienced by those who lived through it. Contradictory accounts. Propaganda masking truth. Records destroyed by victors who want to control the narrative. Legends that grow in the telling until distinguishing fact from fiction becomes impossible. Warhammer 40,000 captures this feeling better than almost any other fictional setting. It presents a universe where history is written by fanatics and maintained by zealots, where 10,000 years have passed since the last time anyone could reliably say what actually happened, and where truth has been sacrificed to ideology so thoroughly that recovering it might be impossible. The theories we have explored are the community's response to this ambiguity. Faced with a setting that refuses to provide answers, fans have done what humans have always done when confronted with mystery. They have created stories to fill the gaps. They have taken the fragments of lore and arranged them into patterns that might make sense. They have speculated, theorized, debated, and in doing so, have become co-creators of the universe they love. This is not accidental. Games Workshop has explicitly encouraged this approach. They leave spaces in the lore specifically so fans can fill them. They contradict themselves deliberately to prevent any single interpretation from becoming canonical. They understand that a mystery actively being investigated is more engaging than a mystery solved and forgotten. The lost Primarchs will never be revealed, because revealing them would close off one of the most productive areas of fan creativity. The Emperor's fate will remain ambiguous, because making it definite would end speculation about one of the setting's central figures. The truth about the Tyranids, the Ethereals, the Cabal, all of it stays deliberately unclear, because that uncertainty is what keeps people talking, theorizing, caring about a fictional universe that should by all rights be too grim dark to maintain interest. And there is something beautiful about that. In our modern world, where information is endlessly catalogued and every question can be answered with a quick search, there is something refreshing about a setting that refuses to be fully known. That insists on maintaining mystery not because the creators forgot to provide answers, but because they understand that some questions are more interesting than any answer could be. That respects the audience enough to let them draw their own conclusions rather than spoon-feeding them lore. The theories we have explored in this video are only a fraction of what exists in the community. There are theories about Cypher's true identity, about the nature of the warp itself, about what happened to the squats before their return as Leagues of Votann, about whether the Emperor is actually Sigmar from Warhammer Fantasy, about the connections between different Games Workshop settings. Every aspect of the lore has multiple competing interpretations, and all of them are valid in the sense that none of them are definitively true or false. This is what makes Warhammer 40,000 endure. Not the miniatures, though they are beautiful. Not the stories, though they are compelling. But the space between the stories, the questions left unanswered, the mysteries deliberately preserved, the understanding that in a universe where everything is terrible and everyone suffers, the one thing that keeps people engaged is the possibility that somewhere in all this darkness there might be truths worth discovering, even if those truths turn out to be more questions in disguise. So we return to where we began. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there is also wonder. Wonder at what might be true. Wonder at what could be possible. Wonder at the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of a universe that refuses to make sense. The theories are our way of grappling with that, of trying to impose order on chaos, to find meaning in the meaningless, to suggest that perhaps, despite everything, there is a larger pattern we can almost glimpse if we look at the fragments from just the right angle. Maybe the Emperor is becoming a god. Maybe he is already dead, and something else wears his name. Maybe the lost Primarchs were failures, or heroes, or something else entirely. Maybe the Tyranids were engineered by the old ones, or evolved naturally, or are fleeing from something worse. Maybe the Ethereals control the Tau through biology, or warp power, or ancient technology we cannot comprehend. Maybe Alfarius is alive, or dead, or never truly existed. Maybe the Star Child waits to be born, or already exists in a future that has always been past. Maybe the greenskins will conquer the galaxy through collective belief made manifest. Maybe the Cabal saved us all, or doomed us, or never existed except as a convenient excuse for decisions made by beings who needed to believe their treachery served a purpose. Maybe. All of it maybe. And in that maybe lies the soul of Warhammer 40,000. Not in what we know, but in what we can imagine. Not in the stories Games Workshop tells us, but in the stories we tell ourselves, using the tools they have provided. We are all co-creators of this universe. Every theory, every speculation, every debate about what might be true adds to the collective understanding of this setting. We build it together, in forums and comment sections, in fan fiction and artwork, in conversations at gaming stores and conventions. And when you think about it, that is not so different from how real mythology developed. The stories people told about their gods and heroes evolved over generations. Different regions had different versions. Contradictions were embraced rather than resolved. The mythology grew richer through diversity rather than poorer through inconsistency. Warhammer 40,000 is the same. It is modern mythology, built collectively by thousands of people who care enough about this grimdark universe to spend their time theorizing about it. So thank you for joining me on this journey through speculation and mystery. Thank you for caring enough about these questions to invest time in exploring them. And remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there is also wonder and hope and the endless human capacity to find meaning in the meaningless, to create stories that help us understand what cannot be understood, to keep asking questions even when we know we will never receive satisfactory answers. The theories will continue. New information will emerge that supports some and contradicts others. Debates will rage, interpretations will evolve, and that is exactly as it should be, because the day we stop theorizing, the day we accept that we know everything about this universe, is the day it stops being interesting. So keep questioning, keep speculating, keep searching for patterns in the chaos, keep telling stories about the stories you have been told. And most importantly, keep watching, because there is always more to discover in the grim darkness. Always another mystery to unravel. Always another theory to explore. The universe is vast, and we have barely scratched its surface. If you enjoyed this exploration of Warhammer 40,000's biggest theories, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support allows me to continue creating content about this incredible universe and the mysteries it contains. Thank you for watching, and remember, the Emperor protects, or does he? Perhaps that is a question best left for another video. Until next time.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.